Hi class, thanks for your attention for our final project here. We have chosen an interesting topic that's gotten a lot of news coverage lately, and I think that's partly what attracted us to that. But I do want to introduce my group here. My name is Michael Ford. My partners Elizabeth, Ben, and Rachel each worked and contributed to this project, and our final product here is something that we found pretty interesting, so hopefully you will as well. But the title of it is Opioid Overdoses in the United States, as you can see. So the opioid epidemic is really something that's been in the news, like I said, a lot lately. It's not something that's brand new, but it's certainly something that's escalated in recent years. Especially, it's almost really exponentially increased in the past 5 years, which is a scary thought that opioids in our community could become one of the number one killers, and those overdoses uh, having to do with these types of drugs would be such a large effect on our communities. So, like I said, the opioid crisis, it is accelerating. Overdoses are now the leading cause of death for those under 50 years old. And from all the data that we've seen and the research that we've done outside of the data, the crisis will probably get worse before it improves. There needs to be some major attention paid, and it's just now starting to get that attention. So some of the desired questions we had were what you see below there. But just to summarize, really we're looking at where in the U.S. are these drug overdoses occurring, the demographic groups that they're occurring in, as well as if there's any trends within these groups. So Ben did a great job of putting together the data set for us and really synthesizing it to a very readable, friendly form. Um, he, as he notes here, the data set itself is from the CDC. So we know we're getting accurate data there, and the time frame, as you see, does encompass a few years. And then the breakdown by state, county, gender, race, and age group also plays a major part in how we analyze this data. We did break it down to identify total deaths per county in each year and evaluated those based on ICD-10 codes. So an individual ICD-10 code could code for poisoning, either intentional or accidental, with opioids or other sedatives that might be included. What we do want to note is that overall deaths have increased, and deaths per 100,000 people have increased really in concentrated areas, is what we found. So hopefully we'll shed some light on that with some of the information we present in some of the next few charts and slides here. One note I do want to make here before we continue is that the data set unfortunately does lack a little bit, and it doesn't quite break down by drug overdose in terms of the individual drug that caused the overdose. So there is going to be some lumping in of illicit substances with prescription opioids as well as other prescription drugs. So take that into consideration when we see these next charts here. But as you see, there are some demographic differences, and really right here, we're just looking at the overall number of deaths in the United States due to opioid overdose. From here, we'd really like to just highlight that the most drug overdoses occur in a select few counties. And what we found was really interesting. And we're going to show some maps here in a second, which will really shed some light on it visually. And I thought it was really pretty alarming when you see these maps. But as you can see here, we've got 4 of the 10 worst counties for these overdoses taking place in Ohio. Primarily, these counties are in the Northeast, and 10-year trends really show that it's kind of spreading from that eastern seaboard area to other pockets. Large pockets now we see in Florida and California as well. And really those may potentially be due to the amount of retirees in those communities, as they tend to have more chronic pain and are prescribed more opioids. Now, whether it's them or potentially relatives that may steal or obtain these drugs somehow and then potentially overdose, again, this data doesn't quite break that down. So as you can see here, we've got states with the largest increase highlighted, and as I just stated in the last slide, it is those Northeast states that are hit hard. Something we were talking about when we were discussing this data and really analyzing it was just the lifestyle of a lot of these individuals that might lead to chronic pain. And Ben and I both noticed that it occurs there in the Rust Belt. A lot of very physical lifestyles typically, so a lot of people doing manual labor that are now probably getting up in age. So as we transition to more of a service economy and less probably manual labor in a lot of cases, a lot of those chronic pain patients are older and potentially may have issues with prescription drugs or may turn to illicit substances when those prescription drugs are not available. This slide really just gives another view, and it breaks it down again by worst offender in terms of the states that have the most overdose deaths. As you can see, Florida, Massachusetts, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all pretty significant. We like this visualization though because it does allow us to see really how they compare to each other over a period of about 10 years there. And then here we have a chart that shows the overdose deaths by demographic in terms of male, female. And we did find that white males aged 45 to 54 were the most at-risk group for overdose. Uh, Females, as you can see by the graph here, significantly less of a proportion of those overdose deaths than males. Again, if you think back to things that can kind of lead into the necessity of prescription drugs or the perception of necessity of prescription drugs, the physical lifestyle, manual labor, historically it makes sense that females are going to obtain or have less of those types of jobs. Males probably have a little bit more, so that does logically make sense in our data we're displaying here. So on this slide, we're really just looking at the breakdown of demographic by race. As you can see, white individuals are much more likely to overdose than others. We really weren't able to draw any conclusions from that other than maybe access or those that are getting prescription opioids, but really not able to draw a lot of conclusions. We did notice that it wasn't necessarily delineated like we might see a few more distinct races or demographic groups broken out, but we were not able to obtain that from our data. Now we'll get into these graphs a little bit here and see some of the regional effects. As you can see, it really is focused into those counties with larger cities. Typically, we think of just population centers. That's logical. You notice the hub there in Florida. Again, a lot of prescriptions being filled there with the big retirement community, and then a lot in the Northeast. I know we touched on that a couple times already, but it's just something we noticed over and over again in our trends. Now we are just going to advance time fairly quickly here through a few of these slides. And what you'll notice is that these circles start to get more densely populated on the maps, indicating more overdoses per 100,000 people, as well as these circles get larger and brighter, if you want to say in color, more towards red. So as you can see, 2007, we've made the jump already. Here we are in 2008, so we see some more pockets there in the middle of the country starting to form. Certainly still a problem through 2010. 2011, we start to see a little bit of a jump there. Those circles really started to get a lot bigger there. 2012, it looks like, again, growing the size of these representative circles for the individuals that are overdosing. Now you're really starting to see a trend here, especially in the past few years. So now the latest data we have is 2015, and just in comparison from that first slide that we had, it's unbelievable the difference in the amount of overdose deaths per 100,000 people. So that's why we hear about this in the media right now. So we wanted to drill down a little bit more and look at some of these highly affected counties. So in the Northeast, we decided to drill down and do this again, where we walk through very quickly how many overdoses are occurring, represented by the circles on this graph, and obviously see that over time as well. Again, this is just a stark contrast from 2006 to 2015 relative to the number of individuals overdosing on opioids and other illicit drugs. And then this slide here is one of our last graphs that we'll show you, but again, it really does highlight the counties in particular and just the sheer amount of deaths that are occurring in these counties due to these overdoses. So in closing here, I want to circle back to our initial questions. First, we were wondering where in the U.S. are these drug overdoses occurring most. We found out really centralized in the Rust Belt. We can drill down more than that. I know we said earlier 4 out of 10 of the most densely populated counties for these overdoses were in Ohio. I find that really interesting. Secondly, gender, race, age groups. What are some demographics that we picked out that were really evident of the most prevalent group for these types of overdoses? And what we came across was white males age 45 to 54. Were states for these drug addiction growth rates and overdoses. We saw in Florida, Massachusetts, New York, Ohio, West Virginia. Talked a little bit about the reasoning behind some of those before. And then, are there any trends in these demographic groups? We really saw an increase in the death rate from overdose of older individuals, which leads us to question the way they're being medically managed, if they're being medically managed correctly, or in some cases, maybe are these older individuals turning away from potentially prescription drugs to something illicit, and then maybe they're not able to control the dose as well. It's, in any event, a very concerning problem. And as we mentioned before, I think it is getting worse right now. So hopefully it will get better soon. But it's going to take a lot of attention from, authorities, the FDA, the DEA, individuals, as well as doctors and their patients to get this opioid and overdose epidemic under control. So again, thank you for your time. We appreciate your attention. And I know this isn't the typical format for giving a presentation, but we are glad to have your attention. So thank you.